we're back, and this is Jawbreaker. I'm Brad Fraser, and today we're talking about behind the scenes on Queer as Folk. And I want to ask about, I'll throw this out there. I mean, I know the answers to these questions, obviously, because I work on the show, but of course our lovely viewers at home don't know any of this stuff, so we can't assume they do. Now, when we're in the writer's room working as a group, we come up with storylines, we come up with parties, we come up with events, we come up with all kinds of things that we hope will work in a certain way in the show. Now, of course, we all know when you're doing something on paper, that's quite different than realizing it. It's, you know, when we write down, there is a party, it's one line on the paper. Well, when you walk onto the set, there are like 300 people, and there are lights and fireworks and the whole thing. It's a very different thing, and there has to be compromise sometimes between what the writers are asking for and what you're actually able to do for whatever reason. Dan, can you think of any examples where you've had to change things that started out with the writers that just did not quite work the way we thought it did when it got on the set?
You know, I'm thinking more in terms of, since Patrick is here, of what is enhanced from the script. As an example, this season, without giving anything away to the viewers.
Especially Brian's sex change.
Don't
tell anyone about Brian.
Don't say a word.
Just between us. Just between us. Brian has a sex change halfway through the season and is replaced by Heather Locklear. Get ready. You didn't hear that here. Sorry, Dan. Go ahead.
No, there's a story with an element of competition, and we wrote this in Babylon, and everyone on the show were very collaborative. But you know, Patrick came up with this idea of having the show. He was talking before the show in Babylon. Using Safanda, sort of a performance piece, which involved gladiators, and what it did is it counterpointed. We didn't conceive this in the writers' room, but visually, it's a fantastic visual. It's magnificent.
Is every director at the beginning of every episode, the director comes in and says, "Can I get a big show?" And then I go ask those guys if they can have a big show. And
but more than that, it reflected what was going on.
But that's what I'm saying, is that it usually starts with just that. Can you give me a show? And then come up with this whole thing, show it to them, ask them if they like it, then take it back to the director, everybody. But that whole chunk of film actually doesn't even come out of the script ever.
Right.
It just was an idea.
And most of the time, I would say, our art department, Patrick, they're all so fantastic, and I really mean this. It's not blowing smoke up anyone's ass. They're so fantastic that they realize everything. I think the only things I can really, off the top of my head, think we couldn't do is, like for instance, we have a very nice sequence coming up late on the street, but the weather is so cold here that now we're thinking maybe that might limit us. We might have to do it interior.
So,
but other than that, everyone really tries to
realize what the actors, the writers have put down.
And Patrick,
I actually know some examples. There were some wonderful concepts for, like there was a scene last year where Ben finds out that his ex has died, and he's sitting outside the diner smoking. Well, originally the concept was that was going to be on a rooftop.
Right.
But you know, sets and availability, and you know, I mean, it was a gorgeous concept.
Right.
But the reality of production didn't allow that to be.
I'm surprised it made that far, because the rooftop stuff usually gets cut out in the room. We're always pitching something on a rooftop, and we end up cutting it.
No, also in the writers' room too, as Brad knows, in the writers' room too, we'll look at our boards. We do it on the board. We talked about it in Queer as Folk Part 1 last year on Jawbreaker, what the writers' room was. But we on the board, and we'll look and we'll say, you know, something we have 10 exteriors. We can't do, you know, we have got to be good producers as well as good writers, and you know, not blow out our budget, or else prioritize. But I wanted Patrick, you know, in our first season we had this scene where there was a political fundraiser, and if you remember, it was at the character of Dr. David's house, and Michael was involved with him, and the rest of the cast came in, and it just said they came in to crash this party, and that's all that it said.
Emmett was wearing something extremely fabulous, but that was it. And I expected him to have like a shirt, like dressed as a man, and I said he has to be in drag, and Peter was like, I'm not sure about drag, and I thought, and actually I said, you know what, we'll do it as Jackie Kennedy in that pink outfit that she wore. Like that, like we offend them with sex, let's offend them with something different for a change. And Peter was really iffy, but then he was 100% for it.
It became one of the most memorable scenes, and it was great.
Right. I mean, that's the thing, is like,
it's one of those like moments that
and I'm flattered that they would actually take that kind of, like, that's how collaborative this whole thing is.
I think Ron and Dan make it pretty clear that all they really care about is the best idea, not who it comes from.
Absolutely. That's not always the way.
Robert, I know. I want to ask you, you know, the actors generally aren't that privy to what's going to happen to that character in the course of a season. I mean, you sort of
Unless
find...
we're able to glean.
Yes,
here and
exactly,
there.
but you sort of find things out, in a sense, is the way the audience does, which is the first time you get the script. What is that like? I mean, has something ever happened where you've gone, whoa,
sometimes it's
what's
great.
going on here?
Sometimes it's wonderful, it's very authentic, because you want to play something without knowing what's coming down the road. I mean, you can genuinely be surprised by something. However, there are times when, I can't talk about this one. Okay, yeah.
Careful about it. Without giving anything away.
Let me go. Well, I can just think of a scenario this season where a character would probably benefit from knowing something that's coming down the road, because it's so part of their backstory. And I know, like with my steroid stuff, we actually went and talked about that, and thank goodness, they said, well, okay, here's what happens, because I was able to contemplate the arc. And okay, by this episode, Ben's going to be at his peak in terms of his mood swings and the roid rage and whatnot.
Right.
But without knowing that, it would have been tough to create the same authenticity.
Yes, to chart the
sometimes
journey.
it works perfectly,
yes.
and sometimes it's like, well, but they have to balance.
Well, the reason we do that too is because sometimes you never know. Some actors want to know, other actors don't know, and you don't want someone to play a result.
Yes, exactly. You don't want them playing the end of the story before the beginning of the story. Speaking of characters and their stories, these characters have changed a lot. This is the fourth season coming up for the show, and some of the characters started as teenagers and have now entered manhood. Some of the characters were in their late 20s and are now graduating into their early 30s and aging. How does that affect each of you as these characters change and grow older? Let's start with you, Dan, because you're right in the room where this is happening. And I know we give a great deal of attention to the fact that these are not television characters who stay in stasis and are the same every week, but in fact they do grow and change.
Right. Well, the idea of the show from the very beginning was boys, with all respect to our lesbian characters, of course, boys becoming men. And
girls becoming men.
Girls becoming men, exactly. And the boys becoming girls, whatever. And this time period between late 20s, 29, to now their characters are mostly 34. Ted's a little older, his character. These are very dynamic, important years, and how things change in terms of getting relationships and setting up your business. And there has been somewhat of a shift, which I think it should be in terms of the going to Babylon all the time and what
They're not fucking around as much necessarily.
Right.
Most of them are in relationships now.
But the danger is getting them to a point where everything is, where you have compelling stories.
You need conflict.
Exactly. So that's
and
what we're
hard
always,
to make conflict for
as you will. Exactly.
in
We've talked about
relationships.
this.
Now we're just about out of time, but Dan, before we run out of time, I wonder, the show has a great many admirers. I mean, I've heard from a lot of them about some crack I made on this show a while ago, foolishly. But it also has its critics. Is there anything you would like to say to the people who are extremely critical of Queer as Folk? You're on television now. You have an audience on Pride Vision. Feel free to say whatever you like.
Well, I unfortunately, you always do, the criticism always does sort of stay more than the praise. And I know we have very loyal viewers. The show's been on for 4 years, obviously 4 seasons. I just think that it's always been very shocking to me that here we are trying to tell a story about a gay community and the vast tapestry of the gay community, different kinds of relationships, many different kinds of characters, and people have settled on the most unsettling aspect of it. But it is part of the show. It is, part of the community as well. It is truth, and all we try to do is really tell the truth and not judge.
Excellent point. Tell the truth and not judge. This is Brad Fraser. You've been watching Jawbreaker. QAF starts up again in April.
April in the States.
April in the States, I think the next month here in Canada,
Yes.
so tune in.
Brad Fraser's Wardrobe, provided by French Connection.